Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She looked around the room, seeing her neighbors, really seeing them, for the first time in years. Bob Chen, who'd moved his trash cans 6 inches inward every week just to avoid her cetaceans. Janet Mills, who'd painted her shutters 3 times trying to find an approved color. The Johnsons, who'd torn up their garden rather than fight her about non-conforming plants. "This is ridiculous," Karen finally managed. "You're all being manipulated by a parlor trick." But Max wasn't finished. His final howl was softer, almost sad. She used to have friends before she became the rule police. She used to smile before she started measuring everyone else's happiness. The community center was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming. Karen stood frozen at the podium, her carefully prepared presentation forgotten. For the first time in 12 years, she had no comeback, no regulation to cite, no authority to invoke. Emma sat back down, Max settling beside her with a contented sigh. "We never taught him any of this, Mrs. Whitmore. But animals are good at reading people, maybe better than we are." Karen looked down at her notes, her handwriting suddenly seeming foreign and harsh. When had enforcing rules become more important than being neighborly? When had being right become more valuable than being kind? But before she could respond, before she could process what Max's impossible honesty meant for her carefully constructed world, the lights in the community center flickered once and went out completely. In the darkness, Max's voice rose one final time. "The real violation isn't against the rules, it's against being human." When the emergency lighting kicked in 30 seconds later, the Henderson family was gone. Karen stood alone at the podium, facing a room full of neighbors who were seeing her clearly for the first time. And somewhere in the darkness outside, she could swear she heard Max practicing something new, something that sounded suspiciously like an apology. But who was it for? The emergency HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread through Willowbrook Estates faster than gossip at a church potluck, and nearly every homeowner had shown up to witness what the neighborhood WhatsApp group was calling the Great Dog War of 2025. Karen stood at the front of the community center, her presentation remote gripped like a weapon. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights preparing her case, complete with PowerPoint slides, audio recordings, and what she claimed was irrefutable evidence of coordinated harassment. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been challenged. "We are facing an unprecedented threat to our community's peace and property values." In the third row, the Henderson family sat together. Emma, a 20-year-old with her father's kind eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, held Max's leash. The dog sat perfectly still, but his ears were perked as if he were following every word. "The Hendersons have weaponized their pet," Karen continued, clicking to her first slide, a photo of Max mid-howl. "This is not random animal behavior. This is calculated, deliberate, and frankly, supernatural." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen clicked again, revealing her evidence. Timestamps, audio files, and a detailed analysis of Max's performances. "Their dog has somehow memorized our entire HOA handbook, not just the public bylaws, regulations that were never officially released, draft amendments from my private files." Bob Chen raised his hand tentatively. "Karen, maybe the dog is just really smart." "Dogs don't breed, Bob." Karen's voice cracked slightly. "Someone is coaching him. Someone with access to confidential HOA documents." All eyes turned to Emma Henderson, who met Karen's glare with surprising calm. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you accusing me of training my dog to what exactly? Sing your rules back at you?" "I'm saying," Karen replied, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "that coincidences this elaborate don't exist. Your dog knows regulations that haven't been published. He quotes amendments that exist only in my personal files." Emma stood up, Max rising beside her with fluid grace. "You want to know the truth about Max? Fine. Show them, boy." The room fell silent as Max tilted his head back and began to howl. But this time, instead of regulations, his voice carried something else entirely. "Karen Whitmore has no friends because she measures her neighbor's grass with a ruler every Sunday at dawn." Gasps echoed through the room. Karen's face went white, then red, then purple. She installed security cameras to watch for violations and keeps a spreadsheet of everyone's Amazon deliveries. More gasps. Karen noticed several neighbors nodding in recognition. She calls the city inspector on her own neighbors for having fun and thinks community means control. The room was deadly quiet now. Karen felt every eye on her, saw the recognition in their faces. Max wasn't just howling rules anymore. He was howling truths. Emma's voice was gentle but firm. Max isn't reading your files, Mrs. Whitmore. He's listening to your reputation. Every complaint, every violation notice, every time you've made someone's life harder just because you could, it's all there in your own words, your own actions. Karen Whitmore's coffee mug shattered against her pristine kitchen floor as the most peculiar sound drifted through her double-paned windows. It wasn't barking. She'd successfully banned that 3 months ago through Homeowners Association Regulation 47B. This was something far more sinister, a haunting, melodic howl that seemed to carry actual words. No dogs shall bark. Between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. came the eerie canine voice from next door, followed by a sustained note that made her silverware rattle. Karen's perfectly manicured fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. As president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA, she'd dealt with rebellious homeowners before, but never one who trained their dog to sing her own regulations back at her. "This is war," she whispered, stepping over the coffee-soaked ceramic shards. Within an hour, she'd called an emergency board meeting. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Karen paced before her 3 fellow board members: mild-mannered treasurer Bob Chen, Secretary Janet Mills, who knitted through every meeting, and Vice President Rick Thompson, who only showed up for the free donuts. "The Hendersons are mocking our authority," Karen declared, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. That creature is howling our bylaws at 7:30 in the morning. Maybe it's kind of clever?" Bob offered weakly, immediately wilting under Karen's laser-focused glare. "Clever? Clever." Karen's voice rose to a pitch that made Janet's knitting needles pause mid-stitch. "They're turning our regulations into a dog and pony show, literally." Rick looked up from his glazed donut. "Technically, the bylaw only mentions barking. Howling might be a loophole." Karen's eye twitched. She'd spent 18 months crafting that particular regulation, enduring countless sleepless nights as she fine-tuned every clause to eliminate noise violations. The Hendersons' golden retriever, Max, had been the catalyst. His enthusiastic morning barking sessions had disrupted her meditation time and feng shui breakfast routine. "Then we closed the loophole," she announced, pulling out her laptop with military precision. "Emergency Amendment 47B2. No dogs shall bark, howl, or vocalize in any manner that could be considered disruptive to the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties." Janet finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Karen, don't you think this is getting a bit excessive?" Karen's smile was razor-thin. "Janet, I've lived in Willowbrook Estates for 12 years. I've maintained my property value, kept my lawn at regulation height, and never once violated the approved exterior color palette. I will not let some smart-mouthed dog owner undermine everything we've built here." She began typing furiously, her acrylic nails kicking against the keys like tiny hammers. "Motion to implement Emergency Amendment 47B2, effective immediately." Bob shifted uncomfortably. "Shouldn't we at least talk to the Hendersons first? Maybe they don't even know the dog is doing this." Karen paused her typing, fixing Bob with a stare that could freeze lava. "Oh, they know. Trust me, they know. And by tomorrow morning, they'll know exactly who runs this neighborhood." As the meeting adjourned with a reluctant 3-1 vote, Janet abstaining while stress-knitting what appeared to be a noose, Karen felt the familiar rush of righteous authority coursing through her veins. She'd built her reputation on swift, decisive action. The Hendersons were about to learn why crossing Karen Whitmore was the worst mistake they could make. But as she walked to her car, she could swear she heard Max's voice drifting on the evening breeze. "The president shall maintain decorative lawn gnomes in accordance with subsection 12A. Her jaw clenched. This dog was getting too specific. How could it possibly know about the known regulations? The violation notice arrived at the Henderson household at exactly 6 a.m., hand-delivered by Karen herself. She'd woken up at 4:30 to prepare the documentation, complete with photographic evidence, witness statements, mostly from herself, and a detailed timeline of Max's vocal terrorism. Tom Henderson answered the door in his bathrobe, his graying hair standing at odd angles. Behind him, Max sat perfectly still, his golden fur catching the morning light like a halo. The dog's intelligent brown eyes seemed to study Karen with an unnerving intensity. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's 6 in the morning," Tom said, rubbing his eyes. "What's this about?" "Emergency Amendment 47B2, Karen announced crisply, thrusting the notice toward him. "Your dog is in direct violation. You have 24 hours to comply or face escalating fines." Tom scanned the document, his eyebrows rising with each line. You're fining me because my dog howls?" "Karen, Max hasn't barked since your last complaint. We worked with a trainer for months. Howling is now considered vocalization under the amended bylaw." Karen's smile was triumphant. "Your creative solution is no longer acceptable." That's when Max tilted his head and, in perfect pitch, began. "Fines shall be assessed at $50 per initial violation, doubling for each subsequent offense within a 30-day period." Karen's clipboard clattered to the ground. Tom stared at his dog, then at Karen, then back at his dog. "Did he just?" Tom started. "Appeals must be submitted in writing within 72 hours. Max continued, his tail wagging slightly as if he were enjoying himself. Karen's face had gone from pale to red to an alarming shade of purple. "How is he doing that? Dogs can't read." Tom's confusion was rapidly transforming into something that looked suspiciously like amusement. "I honestly have no idea. We never taught him this." "Max, where did you learn?" "The HOA president reserves the right to conduct property inspections with 24 hours written notice." Max howled melodically, then sat back with what could only be described as a satisfied expression. Karen bent down to retrieve her clipboard, her mind racing. This wasn't just random howling. Max was quoting specific regulations, some of which weren't even publicly posted. Her private notes, her draft amendments, her personal rulebook that she kept locked in her home office. "This is impossible," she muttered, backing away from the Hendersons' doorstep. Dogs don't have photographic memory. They can't read legal documents. But as she turned to leave, she caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. In the Hendersons' upstairs window, a figure moved quickly away from the glass. Someone had been watching, listening to every word. "Tom," she called out, her voice slightly shrill. "Who else lives in your house?" "Just me, my wife Sarah, and our daughter Emma. She's home from college for the summer." Tom's voice carried a note of suspicion now. "Why?" "No reason," Karen said quickly, but her mind was already spinning. Emma Henderson, the computer science major who'd always been too clever for her own good, the same Emma who'd hacked the neighborhood's shared Wi-Fi password 2 summers ago and never got in trouble because her parents claimed it was harmless experimentation. Karen marched back to her house, her kitten heels clicking against the sidewalk with military precision. In her home office, she pulled out her files, cross-referencing every regulation Max had quoted. Her hands shook as she realized the truth. Every single rule he'd howled was from her private documents, drafts she'd never shared with the board, amendments she'd been planning to propose. Someone was feeding that dog information. Someone with access to her files, her meeting notes, her personal HOA Bible that she'd spent years perfecting. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice try with the amendment. Max says hi." Karen's grip tightened on her phone. She'd been outmaneuvered, but she was far from defeated. If the Hendersons wanted to play games, she'd show them what a real game looked like. She opened her laptop and began typing a new emergency motion. Proposal for mandatory pet behavioral assessments and potential removal of animals deemed disruptive to community harmony. 2 could play at this game, but only one could win, and Karen Whitmore had never lost a fight in her life. Outside her window, she could swear she heard Max practicing scales.